Hey folks, Steve here with another Korean War video for you today. We are going to be doing turn 6 in this video. Maybe if we act fast enough, we'll be able to do additional turns. We'll see. Couple of things. Because the last video on turn 5, I had started recording deep into the turn. There were a few things I didn't cover, and I'll just iterate here because they're still relevant this turn. The last turn, the UN commitment tracks did have a change. We had the rules of engagement increased to level 3. Functionally, what that allows us to do is do interdiction bombardment on additional provinces up here in the north, all except for, I think, these top ones, maybe the top provinces, the northernmost. Doesn't drastically change what we were going to end up doing. And to be honest, if I were in total control of these commitment levels, I'm not even sure I would raise. I'm not sure I would have raised it, but I'm following the historical instructions, which is, I think this is functionally the last change we're going to have to these tracks. So I'm not even going to show this, I think, after this video, but we will still always roll the global tension stuff. That will matter every turn. So far, the global tension has been low or non-relevant, which has been really advantageous to the UN player. The more global tension, the more likely that the game could go to World War III, and that's considered a communist victory for some reason. The other thing is, at the end of a turn, when we get victory points for controlled hexes that are victory point hexes, the UN player could also lose victory points based on the tension level. There's like, you multiply the tension level by 4 and you lose that many victory points. So that is part of the thing we have to watch out for, that eventually global tension will continue to rise. And even if we were not invading North Korea as the UN, that could still endanger the victory points that we have been accruing, meaning we might still lose the game, even if we were trying to do some kind of like ahistorical, not invade North Korea, be chill, restore the status quo. We could still lose for that reason, though the game, I say could, because the game offers you enough of a playing field that you can kind of play around with that stuff as a strategic level game, not just operational, which I do appreciate about it. So just really quick, wanting to hit that as it relates to this, there is a new destabilization value that was in last turn. I did roll the die. Global tension did not occur or did not increase on turn 5. We have to do turn 6 now, right? And so there's 16 for the intervention, which is kind of off camera for you guys. Sorry. There's 3 here, so 19. Another 12 to 31. And so we are at 31 destabilization, which is a new column, right? We had been rolling on much lower columns. We're now in the sort of middle column area. In terms of die roll modifiers, there are none that apply here. We're no longer getting minuses to the die roll. That was based on a turn thing, but now that doesn't matter. The North Koreans have not declared a Chinese invasion of Formosa yet. The reason why they have not is because you lose, like, it's almost like a quarter of the Chinese intervention reinforcements. And given that the communists don't get step replacements, they basically just get the units that they get, and that's it. I don't want to chance us not having enough momentum to go for a victory as the communists, right? So I don't think they're going to do an invasion of Formosa. That's why I'm not doing that. It does add, the potential for more global tension, but that's awfully expensive for how many divisions we lose. I think it ends up being like 10 divisions or something like that altogether over time. So don't want to do that. And no other interventions have occurred. So we're going to roll on the 31 to 34 column. And I rolled a 1, which is still no global tension. So that is great for the UN player. They appreciate that very, very much. With that out of the way, let's talk about the air phase, which is going to be a little bit different stuff we're going to have to watch out for this turn that we have not had to worry about in the past. Okay, so this turn is the first of 5 winter turns. So there are, for November 1950 through the end of March 1951, these turns are considered winter turns. So turns 6 through 10, and then turns 11 and 12 go back to non-winter turns. Now, the primary thing that winter does in this game is it puts limitations on supply and it puts limitations on air power. Broadly speaking, it's going to apply a -1 to depot table die rolls. So if you're looking on the map, there's a note on here for that. In the rule book, this is referenced in a couple of places. So generally, that's going to be an issue. Interestingly, I couldn't find anything about like winter causing rivers to freeze over and there being something to do with like movement costs. I might have to double check that, but I don't recall seeing that anywhere. I know that like OCS Korea, I think, has a rule about frozen rivers, but Korea Fire and Ice in this game don't appear to have something equivalent for frozen rivers. And then the other thing that we're going to have to be careful of is for close air support. We can basically have 8 UN air units assigned to close air support, which for the last long while we've had 10, and we're going to have to knock 2 of them off. So I guess we'd pick the planes that have the worst values maybe, but if they're not used for any other purpose, so I could see like here's a 2-2, there's a 1-0, but if we move that plane off, like he's not doing anything. So like we're losing something and not gaining anything from it. So I might pick this guy and put him down here somewhere. We also get 1 additional 2-2 bomber as reinforcement, so would also put that in here. So we've got 4 and 4. So we're going to have road interdiction in a couple places potentially, and then it's like you take 1 more off and stick them in here, I guess, is probably the best thing. But he's only a 1 strength, so that dramatically decreases our overall value, and it means that we're only going to have 13 close air support as opposed to we were doing much better, right? We were up like 17 or something. So we've lost some, but we're still going to pile all that we can into doing the interdiction. Now, the winter also gives us a penalty on interdiction, and so I'll say that this is offset by our rules of engagement, which did get a little bit better. But basically there's a -2 to that die roll. That's offset by our rules of engagement, which really functionally makes it a straight die roll when we go to see what our interdiction level is going to be. So just want to clear that up in terms of what does the winter stuff even mean. Generally speaking, it's going to get harder to get supply, which means most units, the units that are less able to get supply are going to be much weaker than those who can eke out a little bit of supply. And so far, I've not found any turns where it made a lot of sense to try to save supply points. And I certainly think the winter is going to put a premium on supply to begin with. So I don't see that being something that we'll be looking at there. Okay, I'm going to calculate our stuff for the interdiction, and I'll show that here in just a second. Okay, so we were rolling on the 60 to 78 column. We were just missing 1 point to get us over it on the 79 to 99, which would have been much nicer, obviously. And I rolled low. I rolled a 2. So we've only got an interdiction level of 3, which I've marked there, so it's a -3. But when you add in the fact that it's winter, it's still going to be a -4 to the North Korean supply roll. So generally speaking, it's still going to be challenging for them to get much more than probably one supply point. And the UN will likewise be somewhat challenged because they're going to be dealing with well, they need to get some more ports going because at least at the moment, our port here at Incheon is still being mine swept. So far, my die rolls have all failed to clear the mines, so we're not able to use like when we roll for supply for this depot, we're using a beachhead column, not an actual port column, which is worse. So we are getting less potential supply through here. And this it does reflect reality in that, like historically, there were UN forces that were like operating up here and beyond that they hadn't cleared everything. They hadn't made the ports all operational yet, and they were basically getting the majority of their supplies through Busan, and then it was getting moved all the way up the peninsula. So we have the same problem. We need to get more ports opened up for supply, and we're just not quite there yet, unfortunately. Uh, Okay, and then we're going to have FEC enhancement, and here's what I'll do, guys. I'll just do the FEC enhancement, amphibious capacity, and the reinforcement deployment stuff all very quickly here. And I'll say, in terms of UN reinforcements, this is what's going to be coming in. It's a bunch of non-armor assets. It's sort of like the multinational reinforcements. So there's like, you know, bunch of there's a Netherlands unit, there's a French unit, there's a Greek unit, somebody else I don't immediately recognize. Oh, Thailand. So a bunch of assets that they're not going to do a bunch of amazing things for us, but will be added help. Are going to be coming in, and from here there really are no more reinforcements. There's a handful, but they will not come in until much later in the game because of our intervention level. If our intervention level was higher, we'd get potentially more reinforcements, but there are some that we're simply never going to get, and there are a few that we're going to get, but they're going to be much later than maybe they otherwise would come in. So the UN is kind of almost reaching its operational height, but keep in mind that they can get the UN reconstitution mechanic that allows them to replace losses. So no matter what the given situation is on the map, even if UN forces are destroyed and we're not getting more reinforcements, those destroyed units can be reconstituted. And we actually have had we did get a unit that a full division that had been reconstituted come back right there. So that was last action phase actually, but just to show that that's applying here. So okay, I'm going to go take care of FEC enhancement. We are going to do that, and we're going to get some of the last FEC units upgraded. We'll do the amphibious capacity, which will be 2, and then we'll do the rest of the reinforcements, deployments, and depot stuff, and I'll show what the map looks like before the first action phase gets underway. The operations phase, I should say, of the first action phase. Okay, here we are after all the reinforcements and supply stuff has been determined, so kind of interesting net effect. So let's talk about reinforcements. So the North Koreans rolled a 0 again. I think that's 2 turns in a row. They rolled a 0. So no reinforcements for the North Koreans. I feel like they would have really have liked one at this point as they're starting to retract and run home because everything is under threat at this point. The South Koreans failed to get anything this turn, unfortunately, even though the only penalty they're suffering to their die roll is now the loss of Seoul. They just rolled poorly. So no new division, again, would have been nice for the South Koreans, but we'll have greater opportunities over the next several turns to get more of the South Koreans back in. So we'll deal with that. The U.S. did get, as I showed before, those additional assets. I'm kind of running into a bottleneck because assets come off the General Headquarters Reserve box with a unit, and I can add a couple to the US division that I have built back up in that box. I'll show that in a second. But the others, I'm going to have to figure something out, like take an infantry unit off the map via an evacuation and then attach the assets to them and then redeploy. Like I might have to do that, and I'm okay doing that, but it's going to take some time. Now, granted, the three non-armor assets aren't exactly game changers. So if for some reason I can't get them in for a while, I'm not too worried about that. Um, but otherwise, I had to kind of get organized a little bit because I do have some division replacement stuff that finished up. So all the FEC units are gone. So nothing but the green, stronger infantry are on the map. Several of them had been divided into regiments, so I do have the counters waiting in the wings if they decide to form back up into divisions. I do think that that choice is very circumstantial, so being built up has stronger concentrated firepower. They're greater than the sum of their parts. But right now, having the units divided up into regiments gives us a little more operational flexibility, especially because we're still reclaiming lost territory and reoccupying cities, and that's an advantage there. So we've got, still some of these guys over here that can form back up. They have plenty of armor to assist, so they're going to clean up this. We've got this brigade with British brigade with some British armor that's going to clean that up and start swinging north. Um, and then near Busan, we still have a couple of these guys that work to liberate Masan. The one thing I need to keep in mind is we have a Turkish brigade here, and we have a British brigade, and then we have another British brigade. If we can get those guys together, they can actually form. I believe there is a division over in my force pools that these guys can form into. I think I'd have to go double check. But I'm reasonably confident that there is a division equivalent that they can turn into if I can get them put together. I just need to bring them together. They're kind of spread out. Again, that's okay. We still have a division here. We've got a replacement 2 division that's like, is he off camera for you guys? He might have been. So he's way over here. I need to let him go an action phase of not moving so that he can replenish up to a full combat step. So that the UN player basically gets infinite replacements as long as you can get somebody out of danger and let them sit for an action phase. They can replenish steps. If they get destroyed, then they can be reconstituted on the track and deployed. But if they're already on map, you have to kind of have them sit there. And so this guy is fine to be back here, I think. What I may do is get him full strength and then come evacuate and pick up these multinational assets and then come back at a port somewhere. In terms of the depots, I did put our depot here, which is a 2-strength depot in Kumchan, with the thinking that it can trace back to Busan. It is relatively safe and can still provide the needed primary supply to most of the units that matter at this point. We did designate 1 depot level to our beachhead, but again, because we don't have access to the port, because it still has mines, we're rolling on a worse chart, and weather due to winter was bad enough that we actually didn't get any supply points here. So they're on a restricted commit, which means that Marine unit may not be able to do much but just hold the line, maybe take a couple swings at the North Koreans, but they really need the rest of the UN forces to kind of bring up the rear to take any action. But I don't think they're going to lose Incheon at this point. They've got enough strength that they can maintain themselves. For the North Koreans, we did pull the depot all the way back here, and this is long enough that this unit way out here is in primary command along this road line, with the expectation that these guys are going to continue to pull back. And so this depot is in a very safe place. It also benefits from the fact that it's in the Huanghai uh, province. I'm sure I'm butchering that. I'm so sorry. But it's the province, the furthest south North Korean province above the 38th parallel, and it has a better column on the depot table. So we pulled it all the way back for a better die roll. And the fact that we still have interdiction, we still have winter, they managed to roll well enough to get a single supply point, which they did a limited commitment just to ensure that they're reasonably strong. This could maybe be a turn where they could save a supply point, but I'd rather them still have some punching power while they can, um, as we sort of retreat backward. And note that I've got restricted road movement in both of these southern hexes due to the overwhelming air power. So any uh, North Korean units that flee up here are going to get slowed down, but that's the rub. So that's kind of the overall situation here for the first action phase. What will and I should show the GHQ box. So here you do see I had this division was formed for the regiments that I pulled off map. Well, some were reinforcements, and then I pulled one off map to form up into a strong division. It has an armor asset. It has two of our multinational non-armor assets. And what we're going to do is we're going to use some of our amphibious capacity to drop him um, somewhere. Where we could put him is kind of interesting. If we go above the 38th parallel, that's going to guarantee Chinese intervention, and I don't think we want that yet. What I may do is drop him here, and then he can kind of come over here and support this guy. That might be the best action that we can hope for, and that gives us the ability maybe to actually punch out of here. That may be our first operation. As soon as we can go, we'll go. The thing is, because both sides got one supply point and spent one supply point, it's tied for initiative, which means North Koreans win initiative. So the North Koreans will actually get to go first and kind of set up, whatever defense or situation that they feel is best, before the UN player can do all the things that it wants to do. I don't think, given how sorry a shape these guys are all in, I don't think the North Koreans are going to go on an offensive or anything like that. I think they're going to just try to retreat, try to find some safe places to form a defensive line and delay the UN player as much as possible so they don't get as many victory points as they could get. And well, we'll see. The problem is they can't ask for Chinese intervention until either the UN player has gone beyond the 38th parallel or at this point has taken Seoul. And so, maybe they give up Seoul so that they can ask for Chinese intervention, but it's sort of this decision-making process that reminds me a lot of Korea Fire and Ice, that had a similar thing of like, when do you decide to go? Because it's a higher level geopolitical conversation then, right? There was a lot of debate about, was it smart to go, should we have, at the time, do the UN forces go beyond the 38th parallel? That was a tough decision. Well, all that stuff is coming into play here in terms of how long do the North Koreans hold on? Do they retreat across the parallel? Do they let the UN forces have Seoul, and they're going to get those extra victory points that could come in handy? Do they, or do they fight and delay and maybe, delay Chinese intervention, but they also impact the victory points? And maybe there's not a right answer there. It's just a decision you have to make. So I'll have to think on that and have the North Koreans act accordingly. Given it's only one initiative level, I probably won't be activating more than one unit at a time very often this turn. So whatever I do will have to be carefully thought of, because then the UN will get to go and do all their amazing, awesome stuff. So yeah, I'll come back after the operations phase is over, and we'll prep for the second action phase. Okay, here we are after that first action phase. You can see a lot has changed here. There was an attempt by the North Koreans to try to hold on to Seoul a little bit longer, but they failed to do so. There was a general retreat combat result that was a multi-hex battle, and they vacated. Well, there was some vacating. There was one defender retreat option, and then a follow-up attack eliminated the remnant that stayed in the city. But so minus a unit that was destroyed, many or pretty much all the other remnant North Korean units did retreat and are retreating. Some of these guys off into the hills, these guys back towards Pyongyang. And really, I've tried to orient it where the majority of our armor assets, as the North Koreans will be headed towards Pyongyang, because this is still lots of clear, open terrain in this whole region around the North Korean capital. So yeah, and at this point, I mean, technically this guy is still in South Korea, but besides him, basically the North Koreans are retreating back across the 38th parallel. The UN forces have recaptured Seoul. They have moved the majority of their forces right here is where most everything is. It's going to be a little bit of a traffic jam as they look to clear things out. And I maybe should have spent more time getting some guys over to the east, because there's basically nothing over the mountain terrain there along the coast, just because the whole wave of North Koreans kind of went this way. I didn't see any reason to send something over there, but it will be kind of important to get somebody. It may simply be easier to get over to here via this rail line, rail and road connections headed this way, rather than try to send them out and around and back up. That's just probably how that's going to work. There's still a few stragglers back here. These were guys that either were still moving up or helped contribute to the retaking of the port cities. Technically, I need a roll for minesweeping here, but we got it. Okay, so that's clear. So they had kind of cleaned up this. I probably should have rolled for Masan when I retook it before. So that's a couple of die rolls. Okay, Masan's clear. Forgot about that, but I didn't need to because of the Busan stuff. The main thing is that we've got, not main thing, I guess, side thing, is this guy, I left him on his mobile side. I let the action phase go, and he reconstituted up to full strength. So I will be seeking to get this division out of here, evacuated, to pick up our asset reinforcements in the general headquarters box, and then we'll likely use our other amphibious point to land somewhere near Seoul. I don't know that we're going to try an amphibious invasion somewhere, because it's going to make it a lot easier for the Chinese to intervene. I'm going to have to look at that. I don't have to decide that quite yet, but soon I'll have to decide what I want to do with them. It would be nice to outflank the North Koreans a little bit and maybe drop in somewhere like Wonsan would be nice. Anything we can do to reduce the chances that the North Koreans will get any reinforcements directly, just knowing that Chinese intervention is almost certainly going to occur. So, yeah. That's the situation. So we're going to have, the other thing that occurred, I should say, as we wrapped up, is that the mines were swept from Incheon, so that went away. I managed to just roll the right number for that to go away, and so now, basically, South Korea is basically restored. The other important thing is that the South Koreans are now going to be in better shape for getting their own reinforcements, so we should start to see South Korean divisions show up more over time. The UN depot situation is going to be such that we're going to have probably a single 3 depot in Seoul, and then that should give us the best supply we could hope for the foreseeable future for a while. So we should be good. Once we start going into North Korea itself, that'll start to become a greater problem, but we'll see how that goes. And then I suspect that the North Korean depot will keep getting set farther and farther back, just because it's going to be too difficult to maintain supply. The one thing will be, we may need to look at having like a 2 over here and a 1 over here, or vice versa, because it's going to be hard to trace supply through the mountains with just a single depot placed. Now, the North Koreans going into their own territory, means that if they split up their depots, that will be a little easier for them because they're going to be rolling on better columns every time. And when the Chinese intervene, they don't even need to worry about depots for a certain period of time. But that's part of those rules. So interesting stuff. We are kind of getting to the point where Chinese intervention is going to be more likely. And already, so going into this next action phase, Chinese intervention could occur. We are currently matching condition 2 as one of the possible conditions, which is it is turn 4 later and the UN player controls Seoul, which is true, and Busan, which is true, and currently no UN unit occupies a hex north of the 38th parallel. The other condition that would apply here soon is if a UN unit of any nationality is north of the 38th parallel. So either of those is a trigger to say Chinese intervention is possible. It's just that until we cross the border, there's only a 30% chance of Chinese intervention. So when we get to the beginning of the reinforcement stage, reinforcement segment, for the second action phase, it's only a 30% chance of Chinese intervention. So the main thing now for the UN forces is going to be, can we get, try to adjust the camera to avoid the glare, how far north can we get and seize victory points to help ourselves out before the Chinese actually intervene? So it's sort of a timer, right? It's the timer is ticking. We got to move. I think in this case, my decision would be, and I forgot to refresh these guys, so let me do that. The other thing here is, like, would we pause and not advance, right? Would there be any reason to pause? And right now, in this case, I don't think there is. I mean, you could wait around trying to hope you get more South Korean reinforcements, but every turn we don't invade, given that we've taken Seoul, like, there's still always this 30% chance that Chinese intervention will occur, and the faster the Chinese will head south from the border, and we'd rather be fighting, up here than right here on the border for the rest of the game, because, it's likely the Chinese could push the UN back, and then that would be detrimental to our victory point accrual over time. So we want to start and fight further north where we'll get more victory points, and by the time the Chinese are pushing us back, we've got more space to trade for time and that sort of thing, and pick our own spots to hold the line and all of that. So I think it's definitely an advantageous thing to try to get up there. I think at least in my current game position, to try to say, well, why don't we play the timid approach, the timid strategy, not violate the 38th parallel ourselves, stay good on tension. It could be turn 9, 10, or 11 before the Chinese intervene, because it's only a 30% chance every time. By the time they enter, we might be sitting in pretty good spot for victory points, because as it stands right now, I think we're going to get like 22 victory points. And if we just got 22 victory points every turn, we could win on that alone as the UN. It would be a minor victory, but a minor victory is a victory. You still win. So I think it's very interesting. And I think Korea Fire and Ice does this too. This game, the Korean War, does it well, where, like, the choice is there. Like, there's a path to victory of not invading North Korea. Like, it's feasible. You could do it, but there's a different risk proposition for doing it. And I think because I want to play through the game and see how it operates with history, I'm going to go beyond the 38th parallel. I'm going to expect Chinese intervention, and we'll duke it out. But I think if this were a competitive game, and I've played the game multiple times, I do like the idea that I could choose a different strategy and just kind of see how that plays out. I think it'd be interesting to see, if I followed that strategy, how would the game end up? And maybe if you've played this game before and you're familiar with it and you're just watching this for shits and giggles, and you've tried that strategy, let me know how it went. I'd be interested to know. There's not enough, after action reports out there to be sure of anything. So anyway, I'm going to go do the reinforcement stuff and the supply stuff. We'll talk about if Chinese intervention actually occurs, that 30% chance, and we'll go from there. Okay, here we are after doing the setup for the setup for the second action phase for the operations segment of the second action phase. And things are different on this map. So let me try to hit it for you guys. From the UN perspective, let's get the good news out of the way. Good news is that the North Koreans did not get a division replacement. They failed their role again and weren't going to get anything. So all these reduced divisions continue to be reduced divisions. And when you look at it, it's like, what, there's five left. You can amalgamate some of them and maybe get two whole divisions. So like two full strength North Korean divisions are on the map right now, heavily outnumbered. The other good news is that the South Koreans got a reinforcement. So we have a new South Korean division. It's kind of off, excuse me, it's off camera here just a little bit, but it's there. It's in Taegu, where you can either go in there or Busan. So obviously that one's further north, so it's the best option for running stuff up the road. So another division added to the UN force. That's good stuff. Happy to see it. And in terms of the supply situation, the depot is technically in Seoul. I just have it over here to keep it from getting crowded. And unfortunately, I rolled very low. So while it was kind of like the best column, best roll that you could hope for as the UN, the -1 from winter caused us to only get one supply point, which they used to get limited commitment, the best that they can hope for. There's no point in saving anything. So what's the bad news? What's the bad news here? Well, I can tell you that there is no North Korean depot on the map, and that is because limited Chinese intervention has occurred. So amazingly, when the North Koreans, via I guess case 2 or situation number 2 in the list, because the UN player has control of Seoul and Busan, even though there's nobody north of the 8th parallel, the North Koreans can try to get limited Chinese intervention. You needed to roll a 7, 8, or 9. I rolled an 8. So sure enough, the Chinese are going to enter, and that dramatically changes the game situation, and it puts a heavy urgency on the UN forces. Because right now, it is going to be important for the UN to try to run up and catch these weakened North Korean divisions and finish them off, and then prepare for the Chinese to appear as quickly as they can and get the fighting as far from Seoul as they can. Because now it's, like the whole question about going north of the 38th parallel, the idea was get as far as you can before the Chinese come in and be in a better position when they do. Well, now they're in. So the UN pressure is on, and there's going to be some dramatic clashes here, I think. But there's a lot of special rules here, so we're going to talk through them quickly. Because I did not do the invasion of Taiwan or Formosa, the Chinese intervention forces will be full strength. They won't be missing any units for that reason. There is a holding box for the Chinese intervention reinforcements, but it is way far away on the other side of the table, and that's annoying. So I am not going to use it in my present configuration. It's ordinarily over here at the tip of my finger. And instead, I just put the stacks up there by the commitment tracks. What's up there is 12 Chinese divisions. Now, just to compare the combat strengths, so you guys have an appreciation for it. On the left is a Chinese division. On the right is a North Korean, and the Chinese division is actually kind of not as good. It's got a 12 attack, 6 defense, which is one less than a North Korean division. The anti-tank is about the same. When you look at their fatigue side, it's basically the same. And then in terms of the replacement units, if they're not full strength, they're basically the same. So for whatever reason, the Chinese divisions are not quite as good at defending, But during this phase of the game now, there's a whole number of things that are going to be important. And I'm going to try to walk through them carefully. These 12 divisions do not just appear on the map as part of reinforcements. They are put into a holding box now that they're in. So these 12 are available in the holding box. There will be more when full Chinese intervention occurs, but we'll cover that a little bit later. I'll save that explanation for when it's more relevant. For now, it's just limited Chinese intervention. We enter into a Chinese initiative time period, special period. So from now until the end of turn 8, and there's a marker on the turn track that I'm using to denote that here. The communists will always have initiative. That means they'll always go first. Now, that might not mean, that they're going to execute a lot of units, but they are going to go. First. The other thing is that the communist player does not use depots, so they're not going to place depots. They're not going to spend supply points. They always have initiative, and they don't need to worry about their supply depots. And they'll use a special Chinese initiative period column on the initiative table to determine the number of operations that they're going to get to use every turn. And just to kind of show what that is, I'll show it on camera here so you guys can see. It's that furthest to the right, and it is probably their best column to roll for initiative. So they could activate as many as 4 units in an activation, or do 4 operations, however you want to look at that. But this is the best that they're going to have, and they're going to have this for a couple of turns. Now, several action phases, effectively. So that's sort of the first major bonus that they're going to have. For the first 2 attack actions, so the first 2 combats, effectively, performed by the communist player using Chinese units, the attack values of those units are doubled, and any attack, if they're active, the actual unit that's doing the attack, and any units that are inactive get a 1.5 multiplier. Otherwise, to cut it short and easy, the communist units will all use their printed values kind of no matter what, because there is no supply depot to trace command range to. So they're all going to use their printed values. And these first 2 attacks by the Chinese are going to get doubled. So it's kind of like the surprise attack, like the UN didn't know that the Chinese had come down in such force, and then they, attacked, and so that's kind of what that's replicating or simulating. The one thing will be if there are units that are surrounded, like they would be isolated normally and be quartered or whatever. Instead, those units are simply halved. So all around, it's this massive influx of supply, however you want to look at it, this strategic initiative where the communist units are going to be not having to worry about supply at all. There's going to be a little bit of bonus on those first attacks from the Chinese as they come in, which will be very valuable. And then the final thing is how those units enter the map. So those 12 divisions, they will be brought onto the map by using operation points. So when it's the communist player's turn, they'll spend an operation and they'll say, okay, I'm going to bring in 1 Chinese division. We will put the Chinese division on one of these entry hexes, and there's several, but just as an example, like here's one, right? This would be an obvious one because it's on a road line. Those guys will come in, and then you move, then you take their operation. So they get their full 3 operation points, or 3 action points, but part of the operation is to put them here, and then they can do stuff. So, if the communist player rolls well and say gets like 4 operations, they could bring in 4 divisions and send them down the road, and they're in it very quickly. And the rest of those divisions will trickle in as we spend action points. And obviously, because that's always an option, the communist player will spend at least 12 operations this action phase, bringing in all these divisions. So these divisions will come in. They will show up.
No matter what, they're going to come in. When they come in, they have movement bonuses. So during that first action phase, when those units come onto the map, they can use trails and railroads. So, you know, railroad and then the trails are kind of hard to see, but they're like this. I haven't used them a whole lot because there's so far in the game there's just been better travel paths than the trails. But the trails ordinarily are 2 movement points. So are railroads, right? Unless you're in clear terrain or a road or something better. Here, the Chinese units spend just 1 movement point to use the railroads and trails. So they effectively operate as roads for that first activation where they're coming in this action phase for their 3 operation points. It's like 1 movement point. Now, if they enter the areas where I have the restricted road movement, then those things cost 2 like normal. And again, that's only for this first action phase. The other bonus that they get, all these crazy bonuses, um, is a strategic movement action bonus. So if that activation, that first activation where they come onto the map, they only do strategic movement, meaning they're not attacking at all. They actually get 16 movement points uh, when doing that movement instead of 12. Um, so, and I'm just I was looking at the rules, kind of reading that verbatim, just so you guys understand. So the basic thing that's going to happen here is we're going to have the Chinese come in force, and they're going to come in, and if they can't get to the UN forces, they're going to move far enough that they're going to be pretty close to them, right? Because that's a lot of movement, really. I mean, it's a lot of movement. If they can get onto the road network, then they're going to move pretty quick down to this area pretty easily. If they actually get within range of a UN unit, or if they don't get near these guys until next turn, regardless, those first 2 attacks are going to be super powered attacks. Um, and they're guaranteed to get that bonus. We can't avoid it. It's just going to happen. It's going to happen somewhere, and it may mean an entire UN division could get destroyed. It just depends on where we're at. If those units can come in and swarm and take guys out, so it's this very difficult decision. Like if the UN advances up here too much, they're going to walk right into the Chinese coming down. Um, and either way, would you rather get beat up back here or back here near those important victory points? So it's going to be tough. This is the other major swing in this game, where the big swing was the UN supporting the South Koreans. Now the other big swing is the Chinese helping the North Koreans. And from here on out, the rest of the game and the last half of the game, basically, as we're going to be coming up on the end of turn 6 here shortly, will be the titanic struggle between all of these massed forces. All had their opportunity to have momentum. Now, there'll still be an opportunity for full Chinese intervention again, and that's going to bring in another whole big set of divisions, which will be pretty ugly. And then, even on top of that, after full intervention, there's additional reinforcements. So, something to keep in mind in terms of the balance of the game is that the while there are going to be a ton of Chinese units coming onto the board, both from limited intervention, full intervention, and then the trickle of reinforcements that come in, that is all they get. There is not going to be the ability to replace steps. The best that can be hoped for is that the North Koreans can, over time, get a trickle of reinforcements back onto the map from their pool of reinforcements. Meanwhile, the UN forces, broadly speaking, for the non-South Korean units, will always have the reconstitution on their side, that they will be able to replace step losses as long as they can get somebody off the front line long enough to receive them. If the communists can keep those UN forces engaged, they can eventually remove them from the map and eliminate them. Those units will go onto the reconstitution track to come back, but it'll be a couple of action phases before they do, which gives the communists enough opportunity possibly to create a general collapse of the line, knock a lot of UN units out, take a lot of territory, and by the time those units can reconstitute and come back onto the map, the communists have taken much, much more territory, and it'll be harder to fight back out of that. and maybe that'll mean that the overall um, victory point tally will be not good for the UN. So this is, I mean, it's definitely the exciting part of the game that this kicks up and we get a roll in here. Um, okay, I think I covered everything that's worthwhile to comment on there. Um, let me try to make sure. Yeah, I think we covered everything. Um, it's going to be interesting to see what happens from here. I will do the majority of this stuff off camera, and we'll just come back and I'll show the aftermath. I'm not sure we'll see any major things. If there's a big massive combat, I'll kind of show the aftermath of that before we complete the whole thing, so you guys get to see some of the action. Or I may show some bits and pieces along the way as we are entering units and doing the whole thing. Yeah, so we'll be right back. Okay, here we are after the action phase and really wrapping up everything else, other than the victory point check, which I'll do in a second. I just want to kind of show the shape of the map. So this is the furthest south unit on the map, so we probably won't be using the southern part of the map for a while. So a number of units are kind of coming up. That new South Korean division is just south of Seoul, heading north. The British Turkish brigades are co-located in Seoul, so that next action phase they could, if they wanted to, form up into the division. I may still need to go find the counter for that. I think it's over there somewhere. And then it's kind of interesting. Like I basically just decided, okay, we've got to go north of 38th parallel. By doing that, that opens us up to having the communist player attempt full Chinese intervention next turn in the next action phase. And it's going to be like a 50-50 chance, basically, that it's every action phase that full intervention is going to happen. So in my mind, we've got to try, because we'd rather fight north of the parallel than I think south of the parallel. That's another one of these risk decisions. We could have held back at the border and just kind of reinforced it or something, and then when these guys come down, maybe we defeat them in detail near Seoul, and then maybe by the time full intervention happens, we've had a chance to recoup and we wait for them down south again. I don't know. I had to kind of make a decision. We'll say we'll move north, we'll cross the parallel, we'll accept the fact that full intervention is feasible. I think it's more interesting than to just hang back and try to reinforce the what will become the demilitarized zone. So I moved a number of divisions with their assets up to here to grab the victory points and to create a little cluster where it's going to be difficult for the Chinese to isolate any particular division and concentrate firepower without it being supported in some way. That should be enough of a bulwark that we could counterattack and maybe chew up the Chinese division. That's my hope. We've got a strong cluster with a supply line that leads back. I did send some divisions out to the east to hold some of the important road crossings, to threaten the other coast there as we can get into position, to kind of force the issue there. I may send this guy into like a holding middle position here while these guys set up over here next turn. Just depends on where things get to. And then for the Chinese forces that have come in, I sort of staggered them out a little bit. So none of them got in range to do combat, but that bonus attack will still be available to us next turn. Doesn't matter when. It's just the first two will get bonuses. I should also point out that the many of the other North Korean divisions that were left got attacked as they were retreating. The UN forces advanced, across that parallel and took them down. So there's basically one division with an armor asset left. Oh, and it's a weakened division, I should say. It's down to its last step. That is the remnants of the North Korean army at this point. Everything else on the board is either a garrison, which not much to push over, but they're just kind of there, at the ports and the Chinese divisions. So you can kind of approximate like how things are going to edge out here before long, because again they just the North Koreans are kind of out of it. It's really all on these Chinese divisions. If the UN can maybe pick apart or fight, um, defeat in detail these Chinese divisions, that's going to be the key, to just take them, find them, isolate them, knock them out. If we can get enough bonuses that we can do a D3 or a DE wipe and force these Chinese divisions back or eliminate them, we can wear out the human waves. Now, that is one thing we'll cover later, probably in the next video when these attacks occur, that the Chinese units have an option to do a Chinese wave attack for an additional bonus to their attack, but they basically suffer additional casualties for doing it. I don't think that was in the original edition of the game, but it is in this one for whatever reason. They wanted to make sure that that human wave element was simulated here. I don't know if that's a controversial thing about whether or not they actually did that. I assume that they did. And that, the whole, I mean, from a pop history perspective, the Korean War seems to be taught around this idea that the Chinese came in waves of infantry. And they didn't come in with any armor assets or anything. It is just infantry, but that they, had these wave, frontal assaults that were attritional for themselves, but were also very hard to deal with. So we'll see where we get. I mean, that the thing is, if I use the Chinese units to do that, keeping in mind that we'll get replacements in waves, but we can't repair units. So I have to be very careful. Like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get this bonus because I think it's going to get me what I need. I'm going to accept that step loss for the potential that it's giving me. I just have to be careful of doing that. And maybe the best time to do it is on those surprise attacks where we have the greatest chance of maybe eliminating an entire, UN division. The important thing is, like, there's a cascading failure spiral that can occur. Like, you take out one division, that leaves the flank open for your other divisions that can then be defeated. And sooner or later you can see all the UN units just getting blown off the map and having to be reconstituted, which is what I think the communist player wants to do. Anyway, I have 3 divisions here that are kind of the front guys coming down. Behind them are a couple more. I also have these 3 starting to sort of head out to the mid-range zone. And then I have a total of 4 divisions. Let's see, make sure I've got this right. 8, yeah, that's 12 altogether. These 2 coming down through the chosen reservoir. Or the reservoir areas. Maybe that's not chosen. I'm not sure. Might need to look at a map, a different map. I don't know. It doesn't say chosen on there. Might be a Anglicization problem. These 2 divisions coming down through the mountains using the trails, just to make sure that they can get to these production centers and to hold them. We also have these 2 that had come from way out east. From here, let's see if you guys can't see that on camera. These limited entry areas, you can only do 1 unit per hex in a given action phase. So these 2 came from there, but they're kind of coming for the coast. So maybe ideally these guys go here, these guys go here, just to make sure that the UN can't get too tricky and try to do a naval invasion of one of those areas behind the communist line. Those would be the obvious places to do it. The thing is, if the UN player does do an amphibious invasion, that pretty much guarantees full Chinese intervention. So whether or not it's reasonable to expect that we do that, I don't know. But I think with this, deployment of the Chinese forces, I think it's balanced, that we're covering the bases. We're going to form a strong setup to hopefully be able to attack. The thing is, another bit of strategy conversation here. I tried to make sure that these UN divisions had in each stack, at least 1 armor asset, except for these, couple of guys. But like these main divisions here do have armor, and so they're going to get some defensive bonuses if the Chinese attack them. There is the penalty due to armor. So I'm hoping like there's enough allied armor and air power to kind of keep things in good shape over the next turn. It's going to be tricky. The Allies will need to rely upon their major modifier advantages to offset the odds advantages that the Chinese may get, and then whatever human wave bonuses. So it's going to be interesting, like those two things clashing. We'll see how it goes. Before we wrap up, I'll take a quick look at the victory points. Okay, I was going to show the victory point track, but I don't really see a point. I can just tell you. So we gained 23 victory points. That's the 22 in South Korea, and then the one more for the city taken in North Korea, which gets us up to 66 victory points. So we're a little over the third of the way there to getting a marginal victory. Again, because there's no global tension, we haven't suffered any victory point losses, and ideally, the gains that we get will maintain, will obviously be higher than the penalties, such that we're still accruing. But if our accrual gets too slow, then we could run into a problem in not reaching our threshold. Something to keep in mind is when we go into the beginning of next turn, there. Oh, aha. Okay, so the modifier on global tension. Only applies with full Chinese intervention. And that's just a die roll modifier. There's no other things, like the UN hasn't used atomic weapons, which is an option in this game. We've not done an amphibious assault of Hamyong Pokto, which I doubt that we will end up doing that at all. And we've not entered Hamyong Pokto by land. So nothing has increased the global tension yet at all. The die rolls haven't come up. We've managed to keep the global tension down. So, I mean, ideally, what could happen here is if we keep the tension low, it may be more likely to rise over time. But if we keep the tension low, we hold South Korea well, we fight off the Chinese waves coming, then the UN forces win the game. I see that path to victory. For the communists, their path to victory, it's going to be tricky. I think they definitely need to try to. They're going to have to take Seoul back. That's almost guaranteed what they're going to have to do, and then everything else from there, we'll just have to play it by ear. But I see the path of victory for the UN, for sure. This is much easier to compute and understand than Korea Fire and Ice's wacky objective system. But maybe I'll do a whole comparison video after I'm done with all of this. So anyway, guys, I think we'll call it there. That is turn 6. We're going to go into turn 7 in the next video. We're halfway through the game in terms of turns, but I think each turn, for me, is going to get slower because there's going to be a lot more units going on, but we'll try to keep things sporty for you all as we can, so it's a little more interesting for you, and we're not watching me push every single counter around all the time. That would take too long. So see you in the next one, guys. Take care. Keep gaming.